When I opened my front door after being gone for exactly 40 minutes, I expected silence. Instead, I heard voices. Male voices. Inside my house. For a split second, my brain refused to process it. I stood frozen on the porch, grocery bags cutting into my fingers, heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I knew I had locked the door. I always lock the door. I even checked the handle before pulling out of the driveway. Yet there it was slightly open. I pushed it wider. And walked straight into two men standing in my living room. One was holding a clipboard. The other was taking photos of my walls. They weren't burglars. They weren't masked. They weren't even nervous. They were calm. Too calm. "What are you doing in my house?" I asked. The man with the clipboard barely looked up. "Routine HOA inspection." "HOA inspection?" I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" He finally faced me fully, annoyed. "Homeowners Association compliance review. We left a notice last week." My pulse slowed, not from relief. From disbelief. "I don't live in an HOA," I said. The photographer actually chuckled. "Yes, you do. This entire subdivision falls under Ridgeview Community Association." I set the grocery bags down slowly. "No," I said carefully. "It doesn't." The clipboard guy frowned. "Ma'am, we have authority to enter for inspection under community bylaws." I walked to my kitchen counter, opened the drawer, and pulled out a folder. Inside that folder was my property deed. I slid it across the table toward him. "Read the legal description," I said. He schemed. Then slowed. "Then read it again." And that's when the color drained from his face. "Because my property? It sits on an independent parcel. Not annexed. Not governed. Not affiliated. A legal island completely outside their HOA boundary." The photographer lowered his camera. Silence filled the room. "You're not under the association," he muttered. "Correct," I said. "And you just trespassed." But what neither of them realized in that moment was that my security cameras had recorded everything. And I wasn't just angry. I was about to make an example out of them. They thought the worst part was being wrong. It wasn't. The worst part was what my cameras captured after they realized it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I didn't panic. I simply walked to the hallway closet and pulled out my tablet. "You might want to stay," I said calmly. Clipboard guy swallowed. "Ma'am, this was clearly a misunderstanding." "Oh, I agree," I replied. "But misunderstandings don't unlock doors." That's when both of them froze. Because I hadn't told them the door was unlocked. I tapped the screen and rewound the exterior camera footage to 1:12 p.m. There it was. Their HOA-branded SUV pulling into my driveway. Both men stepping out. No knocking. No ringing the bell. Clipboard guy walking directly to my front door. And then he pulled something from his pocket. A key. Not a lockpick. Not forced entry. A key. The photographer shifted uncomfortably. "That's the master access key for association homes." "Association homes," I repeated slowly. He stared at the floor. On screen, clipboard guy inserted the key into my lock. Turned it. Opened my door. And walked in like he owned the place. I paused the footage and zoomed in. The timestamp was crystal clear. "Now," I said evenly, "explain to me how you have a key to a house that isn't in your association." Silence. Clipboard guy cleared his throat. "The builder must have provided a duplicate when the subdivision was first developed." 8 years ago? I asked. No answer. Because we both knew what that meant. Somewhere along the line, my home had been incorrectly registered as part of their enforcement list. Which meant this wasn't a random mistake. It was procedural, systematic, and likely not the first time they'd done it. You entered without permission, I continued. Without notice. Without authority. We believed he started. Belief doesn't override property law. I tapped another clip. Interior footage. Them walking through my bedroom. Opening my laundry room. Photographing my backyard through the sliding glass door. Every step documented. Every second time-stamped. The photographer finally spoke. We can just delete the inspection record. I almost laughed. You don't get to delete evidence from my house. That's when clipboard guy's phone buzzed. He glanced at it. His face changed. They've already seen it, he muttered. Seen what? I asked. He looked up slowly. Our office received an automatic alert from the security monitoring service. I smiled. Yes, I said. They did. Because when my door opened unexpectedly, the system triggered a silent breach notification. And not just to me. To my attorney. The room felt smaller after that. Not physically. Legally. Clipboard guy's confidence had completely evaporated. The man who walked in like he owned my house now stood stiff, calculating consequences. My attorney, he asked carefully. Yes, I said. He receives automatic breach alerts for this property. That part wasn't entirely standard for most homeowners. But after closing on this house, I'd made a deliberate decision to structure ownership through a legal trust. Long story short, I prefer documentation over drama. And documentation was now my greatest weapon. Clipboard guy exhaled slowly. Ma'am, we can resolve this internally. Internally. I repeated. He nodded. No need to escalate. Escalate. That word almost made me laugh. You used a master key on a property outside your jurisdiction, I said. You conducted an unauthorized inspection. You photographed private interiors. I stepped closer. And you did it calmly. Like it was routine. Silence. Because it was routine. Just not here. My phone buzzed. I didn't even have to look to know who it was. I answered on speaker. This is Daniel Brooks, came the steady voice. Clipboard guy's eyes widened. Daniel, I said evenly. I have 2 representatives from Ridgeview Community Association inside my home. There was a pause. Inside, he asked. Yes. With a master key. The line went quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then Daniel's tone changed. Put one of them on. Clipboard guy hesitated. I extended the phone. Slowly, he took it. Sir, he began, voice tight, this appears to be a boundary database error. Daniel cut him off. Are you aware that the parcel ID for this property has never been annexed into Ridgeview's covenant authority? We believed. Belief, Daniel said sharply, does not grant entry rights. The photographer looked like he wanted to disappear. Clipboard guy swallowed. We can correct the record immediately. Oh, you will, Daniel replied. But first, you will provide written documentation of entry, purpose, and authorization source. Then you will surrender any duplicated keys in your possession. Clipboard guy's grip tightened around the phone. And if we comply, he asked carefully. Daniel didn't hesitate. That depends, he said. On what? Clipboard guy asked. Daniel's answer was calm. On whether my client wants to press charges. The words hung heavy in the air. Press charges. Not file a complaint. Not submit a grievance. Criminal trespass. Unauthorized entry. Improper key duplication. I took the phone back. Daniel, I said softly, I haven't decided yet. Clipboard guy's breathing visibly changed. Because now he understood something important. This wasn't about fines. Or inspections. Or paperwork. This was about leverage. And I had it. The moment the word charges entered the room, everything shifted. Not emotionally. Strategically. Clipboard guy asked if they could sit down. That alone told me enough. Men who believe they hold authority don't ask permission to sit in your home. They take it. I remained standing. Explain the key, I said. He exchanged a look with the photographer before answering. When the subdivision was first developed, the builder provided the association with emergency access keys to every home. Every HOA home, I corrected. Yes, he admitted. So how did my key end up on your ring? That question lingered longer than the others. Because this wasn't a simple clerical error. My parcel was never annexed. My deed made that clear. My title report confirmed it. Even the county map showed a boundary gap between my lot and the governed section. Which meant one of two things had happened. Either someone lazily lumped my address into their enforcement system. Or they knowingly expanded their authority without verifying legal control. Both were bad. One was worse. Clipboard guy cleared his throat. It's possible the builder originally intended to include this parcel, but paperwork was never finalized. Intent, I said quietly, is not jurisdiction. The photographer shifted in his seat. We've done inspections on this property before. That got my attention. Excuse me. He immediately looked regretful. Clipboard guy shot him a warning glance, but it was too late. Define before, I said. He hesitated. Drive-by compliance checks, he admitted. Exterior photos. I felt something colder than anger settle in. So this wasn't the first mistake. This was an ongoing assumption. One that had quietly benefited them. HOAs generate revenue through enforcement. Warnings. Fines. Compliance notices. If my address had been sitting in their system for years, how many letters had they sent that I ignored as junk mail? How many violation reports existed in their internal database under my name? Have you ever found this address? I asked. Silence. That silence was louder than anything else. Clipboard guy rubbed his temple. I'd need to verify records. That's not a no, I replied. Because if they had issued fines, even internally, they had created a paper trail of authority they never legally possessed. And that's when something clicked. This wasn't just trespassing. This was systemic overreach. I walked to my desk and opened my laptop. While you're here, I said calmly, let's verify your entire enforcement history tied to this parcel. Clipboard guy stiffened. Ma'am, that information isn't public. I smiled slightly. It will be. Because if they thought today was uncomfortable, they had no idea what discovery would look like. They didn't want to log in. That much was obvious. Clipboard guy hesitated before unlocking his tablet. His fingers hovered over the screen like it might explode. Internal compliance records are confidential, he tried again. So is my living room, I replied. That ended the debate. He signed into the Ridgeview enforcement portal while I stood close enough to see everything. The photographer avoided eye contact entirely now. Search by address, I said. He typed it in. My house number appeared instantly. Which meant it had always been there. A full profile opened. Owner name, listed. Parcel classification, active HOA lot. Compliance status, pending. Pending. For what? I asked calmly. He scrolled. Violation history. 3 entries. The first was from 5 years ago. Unapproved exterior landscaping modification. I blinked. That was a vegetable garden. He kept scrolling. Second entry, fence stain color non-compliant. I remembered that summer. I had refinished the fence myself. Third entry, trash bin visible from curb on non-collection day. I almost laughed. You've been monitoring my trash cans. The photographer muttered, standard enforcement procedure. Standard. For a property they had zero authority over. Were fines assessed? I asked. Clipboard guy hesitated again. Yes, he admitted quietly. How much? Initial notice fees only. No liens. That answer didn't comfort him the way he hoped it would. Because fines, even unpaid internal ones, create financial records. Records imply jurisdiction. Jurisdiction implies legal authority. Which they did not have. I pulled my phone out and took photos of the screen. Ma'am, you can't distribute proprietary data, he said weakly. Oh, I won't, I replied. My attorney will. I stepped back. For 5 years, I continued, you documented violations on a property outside your governance. You assessed fees. You conducted surveillance. And today, you entered with a master key. Neither man spoke. Because the pattern was undeniable. This wasn't a one-time mix-up. This was a system that had quietly absorbed properties without proper annexation. And if it happened to me, how many others? How many parcels were added during the initial subdivision filing? I asked. Clipboard guy looked alarmed. I don't handle zoning intake. But someone does. He understood then. If this went beyond me, if other homes were misclassified, this wasn't just trespass. It was exposure. The kind that triggers audits. The kind that threatens board members. The kind that makes insurance carriers nervous. My phone buzzed again. Daniel. I answered. Well, he asked. I looked directly at the two men in my living room. They've been fining me for 5 years. Daniel didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was ice. Lock the door. Lock the door. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. I reached behind me and turned the deadbolt. The click echoed louder than it should have. Both men stiffened. Ma'am, clipboard guy said carefully, there's no need to make this dramatic. I'm not, I replied. I'm making it documented. I set my phone on the table, speaker still on. Daniel, they've confirmed 5 years of violation entries and assessed fees. I heard, he said calmly. Ask them whether any correspondence was mailed. I looked up. Were notices sent? Yes, clipboard guy admitted. Standard warning letters. To what address? He blinked. Then looked at the screen. My address, he answered. Which meant those so-called junk letters I tossed without opening. They were official enforcement notices. Issued without authority. Were late fees applied? Daniel asked through the phone. Clipboard guy hesitated too long. Yes. The photographer closed his eyes briefly. How much total? Daniel asked. Clipboard guy calculated quickly. Approximately $1,870. 4 trash cans. For a vegetable garden. For a fence stain. On property they didn't control. Daniel's voice remained level. You understand this constitutes fraudulent assessment of fines. Clipboard guy swallowed. There was no intent to defraud. Intent, Daniel replied smoothly, does not erase impact. The room felt heavy now. Not tense. Serious. Because this was no longer about trespassing alone. It was financial misconduct. Improper fee generation. Potential abuse of covenant enforcement authority. I want full export records, Daniel continued. Violation logs, timestamp data, internal notes, and parcel classification source documentation. That requires board approval, clipboard guy said weakly. No, Daniel corrected. It requires preservation of evidence. Silence. The photographer finally spoke. If this becomes public, the board will panic. That was honest. And honesty told me something else. They knew this wasn't isolated. How many homes were added during the original development? I asked again. Clipboard guy rubbed his forehead. The builder submitted a bulk parcel list when Ridgeview formed. And no one verified county annexation boundaries. He didn't answer. Which was answer enough. Daniel spoke again. Here's what will happen. You will immediately suspend all enforcement actions tied to this parcel. You will issue written acknowledgement of jurisdictional error. And you will provide documentation within 48 hours. And if we don't? Clipboard guy asked quietly. Daniel paused. Then we file. File. Not threaten. Not argue. File. Lawsuits don't shout. They arrive. I leaned against the counter, arms folded. Because for the first time since I walked in, they understood. This wasn't going away quietly. 48 hours later, I was sitting in a conference room at Ridgeview Community Association headquarters. Not as a homeowner. Not as a member. As a liability. The board meeting had been labeled Emergency Executive Session. 6 board members sat along one side of a long polished table. Their attorney was present. So was Daniel. Clipboard guy sat at the far end, unusually quiet. The atmosphere wasn't hostile. It was cautious. Which told me the documentation I'd requested had already shaken them. The board president cleared his throat. We want to begin by acknowledging a clerical classification error regarding your parcel. Clerical, I repeated evenly. He nodded. An oversight during the original developer turnover. Daniel slid a printed county map onto the table. This parcel was never annexed into your CC&Rs, he said calmly. Yet enforcement records span 5 years. The board's attorney adjusted his glasses. There was no malicious intent. Intent again. Interesting how often that word appeared. I was entered into your system, I said, monitored, fined, and accessed with a master key. One board member shifted uncomfortably. The master key policy predates current leadership, she said quickly. So does the liability, Daniel replied. A binder was placed in front of me. Inside were printouts of every violation entry. Every fine. Every automated late fee. There were even internal notes. One line stood out. Property non-responsive to repeated notices. Non-responsive. Because I didn't legally belong to them. I closed the binder slowly. How many other parcels were included in that original developer list? I asked. The room went quiet. The president hesitated. 3 additional lots are currently under review. There it was. Not one mistake. 4. Daniel leaned back slightly. Have those homeowners been informed? No, the attorney admitted. Because if they were, this wouldn't be contained. It would spread. Audits. Insurance reviews. Potential class action. The board president folded his hands. We are prepared to waive all assessed fines and issue formal apology. I looked at him steadily. That's not sufficient. The word landed harder than I expected. Because waiving imaginary fines doesn't erase unauthorized entry. Or years of surveillance. Or systemic expansion of authority beyond legal boundaries. What are you requesting? The attorney asked carefully. Daniel answered before I could. Restitution, written admission of jurisdictional error, surrender of all access keys tied to non-member parcels, and a third-party compliance audit. The word audit caused visible discomfort. Good. Because accountability shouldn't feel comfortable. The president inhaled slowly. If we agree, this matter remains private. I held his gaze. That depends. On what? on whether this was negligence or something far more deliberate. The word private lingered in the air like a fragile negotiation chip. They wanted containment. I wanted correction. Big difference. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He let the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone at the table uncomfortable. Finally, he spoke. Privacy, he said calmly, is earned through resolution, not requested out of fear. The board president's jaw tightened slightly. What exactly does your client want? The association's attorney asked. I folded my hands on the table. I want 3 things, I said. First, written acknowledgement that my parcel was never subject to Ridgeview CC&Rs and that all enforcement actions were invalid. The attorney nodded slowly and made a note. Second, I continued, formal written notification sent to the other affected homeowners informing them of the same classification error. That caused visible tension. The president shifted in his chair. That could create unnecessary alarm. Or transparency, I replied. Daniel remained silent, letting me lead. Third, I said, an independent third-party audit of your parcel database and master key control policy. The attorney leaned back. That would be costly. So are lawsuits, Daniel said smoothly. Silence again. The board members exchanged looks. This was no longer about pride. It was about risk management. Finally, the president spoke. If we agree to these terms, will you waive pursuit of damages related to the unauthorized entry? There it was. The real question. Because trespass alone could be litigated. But systemic financial misclassification? That could spiral. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I opened the binder again and flipped to the violation timeline. 5 years. Multiple internal notes. Escalating late fees. Routine monitoring. This wasn't a one-day slip. It was an operational assumption. I closed the binder gently. I will waive damages, I said carefully, on one condition. The attorney leaned forward. That your board minutes reflect full acknowledgement of error, and that your insurance carrier is notified of the compliance correction. The room went completely still. Insurance carriers conduct investigations. Investigations uncover patterns. Patterns expose oversight. The president exhaled slowly. That's significant. Yes, I replied. So was entering my home. The board whispered among themselves for nearly 2 minutes. Low voices. Numbers discussed. Risk calculations made. Finally, the president looked up. We will agree to all terms. Daniel nodded once. Then draft it? As the meeting adjourned, clipboard guy avoided my eyes entirely. Because this wasn't just a correction. It was a precedent. And once a precedent exists, it spreads. 30 days later, the audit report was finalized. It wasn't explosive. It was worse. It was precise. 4 misclassified parcels, including mine. Outdated master key tracking logs. No formal reconciliation process between county annexation maps and HOA enforcement software. In other words, they had been operating on assumption. And assumption had keys. The board issued formal written acknowledgement of jurisdictional error. Certified letters were mailed to the other affected homeowners. The master key registry was surrendered and restructured under third-party control. And, most importantly, the board minutes reflected full admission of administrative overreach. They kept their promise. So did I. No lawsuit was filed. No press release was issued. No courtroom drama. But that doesn't mean nothing happened. Because quiet corrections inside HOA systems travel fast. Word spreads through management companies. Through attorneys. Through insurance advisors. Through developers. Ridgeview wasn't publicly destroyed. It was professionally warned. And that warning reshaped their operations permanently. A week after everything closed, I received a final envelope. Inside was a formal apology letter signed by every board member. It included confirmation that all enforcement records tied to my parcel had been permanently deleted and that my address was removed from every compliance database. At the bottom, one sentence stood out. We regret the presumption of authority. Presumption. That word again. But this time, it was written in ink. The master key they once carried. Returned and logged. Access privileges restricted to verified annexed parcels only. Boundary verification protocol implemented. Annual audit scheduled. All because they walked into the wrong house. I still think about that first moment sometimes. Opening the door. Hearing voices. Seeing strangers in my living room. If I had panicked, screamed, or called police immediately, this would have been a small incident. Instead, I documented. I questioned. I demanded transparency. And I negotiated from leverage. HOAs rely on confidence. On homeowners assuming authority is legitimate. But authority without jurisdiction is just overreach. And overreach, when documented properly, becomes correction. They thought they were conducting a routine inspection.
What the actually triggered was reform, and here the part the matter most. If it happened to me, it can happen to anyone. So check your parcel map, read your deed, verify your annexation status, because sometimes the most powerful position in the room, it's the homeowner. How doesn't belong there.